Hello, it's time for one of my favorite times of the day, which is read aloud and poetry. We are almost finished memorizing our Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star poem. We're going to add a stanza today and the last stanza next week. So by the time we finish school, we will have memorized Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. All right, let's get ready to review our poem. Let's sit nice and straight so that we can better prepare our voice and our oxygen in our lungs so that we can recite it very nicely. All right, here we go. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star by Jane Taylor. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. When the blazing sun is gone, when the nothing shines upon, then you show your little light, twinkle, twinkle, all the night. Then the traveler in the dark thanks you for your tiny spark. How could he see where to go if you did not twinkle so? In the dark blue sky you keep, often through my curtains peep, for you never shut your eye till the sun is in the sky. Very good. Very, very good. I wish I could hear you recite that poem. Maybe when we're finished, if you have some time, you can send us some videos. If not, that's okay. But yes, I would really, really like to hear how you have been practicing that poem. All right, well, let's get ready for Read Aloud. We have been reading Flat Stanley. I hope you've enjoyed his adventures. They have been pretty interesting, haven't they? In chapter 4 was pretty exciting, right? And a little scary to be in that situation. However, Stanley was a trooper. Stanley was able to catch those thieves in the museum. So that chapter was filled with lots of excitement and a lot of adventure. So we are on chapter 5, our last chapter, and we are done with Flat Stanley. And next week, we have other little surprises for Read Aloud. So make sure you tune in. All right, let's begin. Chapter 5, Arthur's Good Idea. For a while, Stanley Lambchop was a famous name. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, "Over there, Agnes, over there. That must be Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the sneak thieves." And things like that. But after a few weeks, the whispering and the staring stopped. People had other things to think about. Stanley did not mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. And then came a further change, and it was not a pleasant one. People began to laugh and make fun of him as he passed by. "Hello, Super Skinny," they would shout, and even ruder things about the way that he looked. Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's other kids I mostly mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm different, because I'm flat." Excuse me. "Shame on them," Mrs. Lambchop said. "It is wrong to dislike people for their shapes or their religion, for that matter, or the color of their skin." "I know," Stanley said. "Only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Lambchop, "but they can try." So isn't that the truth? Don't we find sometimes that people make fun of other people because of the way that they look or the way that they do things? And that reminds me, When we were studying the book of James this year, James says in the Word of God that we should not make exception of people. Do you remember when we studied that? God is telling us through James that we should not play with people or be friends with people because they're rich. Remember, that's what James was talking about, that there were people that just wanted to hang out and be friends with the rich but not with the poor. And so James encourages us in the Bible that we should not make exception of people. Why? Because God made us in his image and we are all loved by him. And so we should not be making fun of others for the way that they look or the way that they say things, or if they sound different, if they have a different type of accent, or they do things different. We should never make fun because that hurts their feeling. And remember, we also learned in James that our tongue can be used as a blessing or as a curse. So when we make fun of people, we are cursing. We are making them feel bad. We are not loving them. So we always have to find ways to bless with our mouth, with our mind, with our thoughts. And that is something that I was just reminded of as we were reading about Stanley, because he's feeling a little sad because of how he's being treated. All right, let's keep reading. Later that night, Arthur Lambchop was woken by the sound of crying. In the darkness, he crept across the room and knelt by Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" he said. "Go away," Stanley said. "Don't be mad at me," Arthur said. "You're still mad because I let you get tangled the day you were my kite, I guess." "Skip it, will you?" Stanley said. "I'm not mad. Go away." "Please, let's be friends." Arthur couldn't help crying a little too. "Oh, Stanley," he said, "please tell me what's wrong." Stanley waited for a long time before he spoke. "The thing is," he said, "I'm just not happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be a regular shape again, like other people. But I'll have to go on being flat forever. It makes me sick." "Oh, Stanley," Arthur said. He dried his tears on a corner of Stanley's sheet and could think of nothing more to say. "Don't talk about what I just said," Stanley told him. "I don't want the folks to worry. That would only make it worse." "You are brave," Arthur said. "You really are." He took hold of Stanley's hand, and the two brothers sat together in the darkness, being friends. They were both still sad, but each one felt a little better than he had before. Isn't that very special? Do you remember how Arthur had been feeling throughout most of the book? He was feeling jealous, but now I think Arthur has had a change of heart. I think Arthur now thinks very, very highly of his brother. What does he say that Arthur is? Brave. He calls him brave. And Arthur is also feeling sad because his brother is sad, so he's being compassionate. And he is also hurting for his brother. And it says that now they are friends. So they forgave each other, and they are now feeling like they have never felt before. They are at peace with each other. And then, suddenly, though he was not even trying to think, Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and turned on the light and ran to the big storage box where the toys and things were kept. He began to rummage in the box. Stanley sat up in bed to watch. Arthur flung aside a football and some lead soldiers and airplane models and lots of wooden blocks. And then he said, "Aha!" He had found what he wanted, an old bicycle pump. He held it up, and Stanley and he looked at each other. "Okay," Stanley said at last, "but take it easy." What do you think they're going to do? What are they up to? He put the end of the long pump hose in his mouth and clamped his lips tightly about it so that no air could escape. "I'll go slowly," Arthur said. "If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hand at me." He began to pump. At first, nothing happened except that Stanley's cheeks bulged a bit. Arthur watched his hand, but there was no wiggle signal, so he pumped on. Then, suddenly, Stanley's top half began to swell. It's working, shouted Arthur, pumping away. Stanley spread his arms so that the air could get around inside him more easily. He got bigger and bigger, then buttons of his pajamas top burst. Pop, 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 a moment more, and he was all rounded out, head and body, arms and legs, but not his right foot. The foot stayed flat. Arthur stopped pumping. "It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons," he said. Maybe shaking it would help." Stanley shook his right foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound, it swelled out to match the left one. There stood Stanley, as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. "Thank you, Arthur," Stanley said. "Thank you very much." The brothers were shaking hands when Mr. Lambchop strode into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. "We heard you," said Mr. Lambchop. "Up and talking when you ought to be asleep, eh? Shame on—" "George," said Mrs. Lambchop, "Stanley's round again." "You are right," said Mr. Lambchop, noticing. "Good for you, Stanley." "I'm the one who did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Everyone was terribly excited and happy, of course. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate the occasion, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into their beds and kissed them, and then they turned out the light. "Good night," they said. "Good night," said Stanley and Arthur. It had been a long and tiring day. Very soon, all the Lambchops were asleep. The end. Wow. Well, Stanley is now round again. He is back to himself. How did you like that story of the adventure? I think we learned a lot in that book. We learned about feelings of jealousy and how we can help ourselves by not feeling jealous. And the main thing is what? Confess and pray and ask God to help us. We also have to make sure that we identify those feelings and always have a grateful heart. And we also learned that it is important for us to love our neighbors like ourselves. That is what God says in His Word, that we have to love our neighbor like ourselves, which means we should not be making fun of anybody, or we should not be using our tongue or our thoughts to hurt people, but to bless. Wow, we got all of those great lessons from Flat Stanley. And of course, we saw tons of fun adventures that he did. All right, boys and girls. Well, next week, Mrs. Bennett and I will have some other fun little activities during Read Aloud. All right, boys and girls, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We will see you soon. Bye.